be all right.
All right, well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's like coming home for me. We had a lot of Hoovers actually from the Pittsburgh area, as well as Hillsdale. There actually was a Mike Hoover he's my cousin, my second cousin, and he passed last year, but the church was packed. And it's because the family, Rex Hoover, they owned the dock company out of Pittsburgh. Luminous-Man, thank you so much. Oh yeah. So that's my family, the Hoover family. So it's nice to be back here. A little bit about me. First of all, Michael Hoover, candidate for the United States Senate, and I am from a small town. After meeting with thousands of people across Michigan, I learned that people basically want three things. They want a safe community, they want a good economic opportunity, and they want a strong economy. And it's really up on us leaders to make sure that happens. And that really comes back to us. I also believe that we're here to do two things. I think we're here to bring up our children in loving homes and to pass on a better country that was gifted to us. And I think we just boil it all down. That's what we're here to do. But it takes a certain kind of leader to do that. And when I look at leadership, I kind of break it down like this. The first thing is basically four values. The first one is integrity. Are you who you say you are on the outside, same person on the inside? The second thing is inner peace. And certainly that sounds biblical, and I'm certainly a Christian, but it's being comfortable with who you are as a person. The third thing is, do you have your priorities in order? Do you know what's important and what's not important? And then lastly, fourth is vision. Can you see what needs to be done and how to get there? So it's become overwhelmingly apparent that many of our current leaders don't share those values. They are in DC to benefit themselves instead of the people. And how many times are we going to watch people go to DC and basically put themselves in a better situation instead of taking care of the people? We see it over and over. No one trusts them, and you shouldn't, because they've proven who they are. Let's just go over some of the statistics. The cost of living in my lifetime is up 1,000%. It's up 42% just in the last 3 years. Biden dictated 517 new regulations in just his first 2 years. That cost the average family $15,000. That's when people don't really understand what the regulations truly do. Regulations do another thing too. They also squeeze out small business owners. We have to really champion small business owners, and they truly they are trying to attack small business owners. You saw that during COVID. You saw that during the shutdown, where big business was allowed to do business, but small businesses were forced to shut down. Our debt has increased 500% since 1999, and the interest on the debt will exceed the national defense budget next year. Social Security is going to be bankrupt in 9 years, and that's followed closely behind by Medicare. And we spend more money on so-called health care than any other developed nation, yet we lead those same developed nations in sickness. We lead in diabetes, we lead in cancer, and we lead in heart disease. Crime and deaths of despair at all-time levels. Our border is wide open while we send billions to Biden's war in Ukraine. The largest and fastest growing employer in the United States, it's our government. And the wealthiest 4 connected counties in America. You would think they'd be in New York, California, Florida, Texas. Nope, that's DC now. That's the result of a government gone wild. When I'm asked, why in good God would I be getting into this? You've lived a good life, you have an amazing family, why wouldn't you just walk into the sunset? But that's not who I am. And that's not how I was raised. And my life is to prep me for this next chapter of my life. So let me give you a little background about me and who I am. I was raised by 2 factory workers. My dad worked at Tecumseh Products, not too far away, and my mom worked for Fisher Body in Adrian. At the age of 17, I turned out to be a pretty good football player and was getting recruited across the state. But life had a curveball for me, and I found out that I was going to be a father my senior year. I did. But as things worked out, the mom ultimately did have the baby. She didn't want to take the baby home, but I did. I took my daughter home when I was a senior in high school. I had a new girlfriend at the time, and she decided to stick with me. We now have 4 children, and we had 4 children by the ages of 24 and 27. We got married 3 years later. So we were pretty young parents. For a while, life was pretty tough. We were living off of $918 a month, and I had student loan debt back in 1988 of $50,000. In today's number, that's substantially higher. But after 13 interviews and competing with 25,000 candidates from across the country, I was hired into the Dow Chemical Company after graduating from Northwood. And we made a decision right then and there that my wife would stay home with the kids, and we would sacrifice and do whatever we had to do to maintain that decision where she stayed home. So we bought used, and we lived in a small home. 7 years after Dow, I helped lead a significant change in the automotive industry. I was part of a team that was responsible for the exterior of the car, and we figured out a way to make the front end much more aerodynamic. And what that did is made our vehicles much more fuel economic on fuel, and also changed the design. So if you think about a car, and you think about how a bumper kind of sticks out, or it used to stick out, and you could sit on the front bumper as a seat. And then over time, that kind of went away, and the grill came out and became in the impact zone. So you can blame me for taking away your seat. The good thing is that when I did that, I won an award. I won a big award. It's called the Dow President's Award. And I also won an award from the Society of Automotive Engineers for the most innovative use of plastics. And so that did something good for me. And I mean, certainly I got my name out there. I didn't realize to the extent that it did, but I had companies from all over the world trying to hire me away from Dow. Obviously, Dow's a very big company, and so you have that big Dow diamond behind your name. People are interested. And after a couple of years of that, I figured out, hey, this would probably be a bad idea to start that business that you've always wanted to start. So I did. I started my first business, and what I was basically doing is the same thing that I did for Dow, and that was doing technology and market development. And one of the brightest successes was creating a national solution for our plastic waste. That's our bottles. And these are the containers like milk jugs, Tide, and Downy bottles. And we figured out a way to be able to use them into the automotive industry. So you get this, at the time I was doing business with Asia, Europe, North and South America, and this company out of Troy, Alabama called me up and said, hey, we want you to come down and check out something we've got. And so I went down, and it turns out this company does most of the recycling for the automotive batteries, traditional automotive batteries that are truly recyclable. And they were taking the plastic and the lead. Well, out back, a little bit further back, there was this huge pile of plastic. And when I say pile, I mean bales that are 10 foot by 10 foot, scaled up probably 4 or 5 times high, it was as big as a football field. They said, okay, Mr. Hoover, what can you do with this? I said, what are you doing with it now? I said, well, we're cleaning it up. We sell it into mostly the flower pots and industry like that. And we're just curious, maybe you can do something with that in the automotive industry. So we went to work. And a couple of years later, after we did that, we figured out we could make it work. It took a little bit of finagling. We got that material approved at Ford, then GM, and then Chrysler, and then Toyota, and you name it. And now that material's been used for the last 22 years, where we displaced over 500 million pounds from going into plastic waste. It's now being used in your cars. So being an innovator, we just continued to have opportunities come our way. And one of the things we did is we opened up a recycling center. Actually, that was open, it was going to close, it was township owned, and the cool thing was we privatized it. And now we recycle every material from yard waste to mattresses We also opened up a home renovation business where we actually built new homes and did renovations of homes as well, existing homes. And we brought a franchise that protected people across the state from diseases such as West Nile, Lyme, and Zika. And we serviced from Greater Lansing to the Metro Detroit area. And I have to talk about our children because, you know, I told you earlier my wife stayed home and she dedicated her life to those kids. So it's always important for me to talk about them. They turned out pretty darn amazing because my wife's a pretty darn amazing woman. We had 3 all-state athletes. We had a state champion. We had an All-American and a Michigan State University Rose Bowl champion. He actually went on to play little football for the team down in Indiana called the Colts and then the Eagles. All 4 attended college here in our state. All are married, and we now have 9 grandchildren. We added one more in 1997 when we took in a teenager from Flint, and I'm proud to say that Robert is doing really well now, and he's a Division I assistant football coach. So earlier I mentioned, why shouldn't I just live out my life and enjoy the easy life? And I mentioned that how I'm wired, and now when I look at my 9 grandchildren, I can't help but not think that they're going to be having children too. And then I just can't imagine that handing over a country that's broken and telling them good luck as our nation falls off a cliff. So how do we fix this mess? How do we get our nation back on track? The answers are in our history. That's what I believe. Back when I was a kid, and a lot of you when you were kids too. When we were kids, we were actually number 1. We were number 1 in almost every metric you could think about. The value of our dollar, our education, you could test us against any nation in the world and we would beat you. Certainly our values, our health. Look at the pictures of kids from the 70s. I'm one of those kids. We were pretty darn healthy. Our Navy, our music was great, even our movies, and even our national debt was on the decline. Can you imagine? In today's overload of information, it's important to step back and look at the bigger picture. And I think it's really important for us to step back and look in time. So I'm going to do that a little bit with you if you don't mind. From 1942 to 1972, productivity and hourly compensation went up together. So it actually went up 245%. And as that went up, wages went up to 245%. However, in 1972, those 2 lines stopped going up together and they merged away. And they've been merging away from each other ever since. That, to me, is the biggest tragedy and the biggest war that has been taken and put on to the American people since that time. And I'll get into more detail on why that truly plays out. So in 1970, you could buy an average home for $25,000. That took about 18,000 hours of work. It's really important to listen to those numbers. $25,000, it's amazing, isn't it? And that took you 18 hours of work. Today, it takes 50,000 hours of work. And what that really meant, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, is it meant that no longer could you keep up. You couldn't keep up with one income. They made it so that both parents had to go to work, and that took away the family, and that made it so a lot of kids were being raised without mom and dad at home. And then also we would go into huge debt. It used to be that one income easily could take care of your home, your car, your health, and your kids' education. And that, of course, pardon me? And a vacation. And a vacation, that's right. That's right. So what happened? What happened with the 1%? And why did this take place? Well, the 1% now has more wealth than the bottom 90%. That wasn't the case back in the early 70s, and certainly not the 60s either. But what caused this? What was the trigger that made the divergence take place? The standard of all standards, the value of our money, was abandoned. The gold standard was kicked to the curb. Why did they do this? Because the smart and elite knew that they would become uber rich and powerful because their wealth is in assets. Assets are such as stocks and real estate. Sure, do a lot of us in this room own stocks and real estate? Sure. But you know what our real value is? It's our time. It's our time. And when we go do a job and we work and we do something, we get paid for that's how we get paid, and that's where our value is. Certainly we have our homes too, but not like they do. It's not even close. Can you imagine when the Biden administration was asked this question, what are people supposed to do with this inflation? And how are they supposed to keep up? Janet Yellen actually said, well, they need to buy more assets. Isn't that something? That's how far disconnected they are. The 1% of earners is now up 250% since 1970. That's 5 times as much wealth as they had in 1971. And the bottom 90% has hardly seen their incomes change. Productivity, like I mentioned before, up 246%. So where did that money come from? In 1971, the United States debt was about $370 billion. More importantly, it was about 25% of GDP, gross domestic product. Today, as most of you already know, the debt is at $32 trillion. But more importantly, it's 130% of GDP. So now when you take a look at it, it turns out a lot of their wealth was created on the backs of us, our children, our children's children, and our children's children's children. It's disgusting. So who are these super elite? Let's take a look. Well, the first one on the hook is the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex needs an enemy, so they create one. Let's go back in history. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. We don't need these wars. We need to be involved with these wars, but they have to be in those wars. Take a look at Lockheed. Lockheed right now is reaping $2.3 billion so far just in restocking the Pentagon, which deployed weapon to replace the depleted stockpiles and weapons. However, that's only $2.3 billion. They got $6 billion slotted to them. They love this war. They cheer on this war. They want this war. Let's move on to the Federal Reserve. Kind of hinted on that a little bit ago, but the Federal Reserve, they kept interest rates lower for longer. This wasn't meant to help you and me. Kind of sell it as a ruse. Oh, you get a good low interest rate. That's not what this is about. Everybody knew that this would create a massive financial problem. So why did they do it? Because it benefited the super elite, as I said before. It benefited asset prices. And financial assets are the main source of wealth for the super elite, but not for us, not for the masses. The masses just got stuck with much, much higher costs of living and changing how we live. No longer can mom stay home or dad stay home, and we must go into significant debt. $91 trillion. When you put all our debt together and you add it to the current deficit, our current national debt, $91 trillion. So why run massive debts? Why don't our elected representatives support a balanced budget? It's because those deficits give money to politicians to hand out to their crony supporters. They bribe the key voter groups to win elections. The best example I can think of right at the top of my head is unions. I got nothing against unions personally, I really don't. If you work in a union and it's good for your family, God bless you, I think it's fine. But here's the problem. It's a ruse. No union worker, no working class can keep up with an inflation that I just talked about.
UPS just agreed to give $50 an hour to their employees.
Yeah, and think about that. In a couple of years, that won't be near enough for them to live. All of this, and that goes back to something else still, that prices out the small business owner. It makes it so the small business owner has to now compete with that $50 an hour. Good luck. And that just makes it so there's less competition. I'll give you a quick stat on that. Remember when they had I'm going off a little bit, but hope you don't mind. Remember we had the too big to fail banks, and we're gonna bail them all out? Remember that? So, we gotta bail them out. All that did was an opportunity for the super elite to kill their competition. They made regulations similar to paying people really high, but they made regulations so hard that these small to mid-sized banks would have to go out and hire tons and tons of people just to keep up with the new regulations. We went from 18,000 banks, now we have 4,000 banks. It's just strategy. So when the value of the dollar disappears, everything goes to pot. I got that from my grandma Hoover, God rest her soul. Prices, wages, retirement funds, values, our work time, everything is calibrated, the value of our currency. And when money is fake, everything and everyone begins to wobble. What did we see this week? I wrote this speech last week, but I didn't know that we were going to be downgraded to AA from AAA. That's the wobble I'm talking about. America started down a long, torturous path in 1971, which started as a snowball, is now a huge avalanche of a nation headed downhill. Just look around. Earnings to GDP, childhood obesity, two parents having to work, single parent homes exploded. That's a whole different story because we did a war on the family, and I'll talk about in a minute. Massive debts, highest cost of healthcare amongst developed nations, yet we're the sickest, and we have a poor education system and performance now. My Democrat opponent, she's a cheerleader for and the number one ambassador for the deep state and its empire. This is what happens when you attend elitist schools, elite colleges, and get connected into the system that pays you to do more for it and less for the people. She's well known for her rant where she states, party over country, always, always party over the country. And we gotta make sure the rest of the state of Michigan and most of America hears that message. It's on, the good news is that it's on YouTube. She is proud of it, but the Republicans and the independents the Republicans that identify as Republicans also don't like it. So that's a good thing. Government continues to expand size, power, and control over the voters. It's almost as big as those that elect it. We're at a breaking point. The insiders, the government people who make their living from the government have more power than the people that make a living outside the government. That's a true fact. Each year the government gets bigger and shrinks the true private sector. For our system to work properly, and the only way to avoid a government takeover is through elections of representatives that work on behalf of the people instead of working on behalf of themselves. However, and unfortunately, big business, big media, Wall Street, academia, military-industrial complex, big tech, Federal Reserve, big pharma, and many of our back candidates answer to them instead of the people. That's happening in our country today. It's truly a war. It really is. I've been in DC 6 different times, and I've sat down and talked to several congressmen and women, as well as senators. I met with the Heritage Foundation, Freedom Works, Club for Growth, National Policy Council, the the Social Conservative group, and every direction we look, we know we have a war. And certainly part of the war is inside, it absolutely is inside of our country, and some is coming from the World Economic Forum, as well as the WHO. So know that you're talking to somebody that's had an opportunity to see behind the curtain and speak with a little bit of intelligence on the information that I've received. But one thing that's interesting about that group that I just mentioned off, all those big people, they don't get along on everything, but they get along on one thing, and that's to maintain the system, because it pays them really well. This is what has control today. The elite group has seized a great deal of control, and our government getting bigger, so their influence on the electoral process over private sector votes continues. This is why you see elite-owned candidates getting unlimited campaign dollars. It's a great return on investment. This is how nations fail. We've seen it in history. We've seen a takeover by the government in industry after industry. Just look at education now, look at healthcare, and now even our own automotive and our energy industries are under attack by government takeover. And to make sure they maintain control, we have seen an upswing in attacks of our private citizens. Look at President Trump, for example. We see arrests of political players who stand for freedom. We see it with attempts to regulate free speech and religious liberty right here in our own state. We see it when our civil rights are attacked. This is what 2024 is all about. And that's why I'm standing before you today.
It's in our own county here.
Absolutely. I've heard your stories. Yep, you have the same problem right here. It's a battle of madness versus what's proper. It's a choice between a full government takeover and an American awakening. It's for the future of our nation of citizens, or the future that falls into the elite view. And if this happens, no longer will we have a government of the people. No longer will we have a government by them, and no longer will we have a government for them. You'll have a government for the elite. And we are guaranteed that we'll have lower real incomes, a slower economy, we'll have more rules and regulations, we'll have less influence over public policy, and we'll have higher consumer prices, and you can guarantee this, you'll have a generous heaping of contempt from the elites. So how those apples? Not very fun, is it? And I'm so sorry to see your faces, but I want to turn those faces around now. There's some good news. There's actually great news. Turns out, after talking to thousands of people across our state, and certainly across the country, the typical voter doesn't think government should encourage genital mutilation, or more foreign wars, or higher and bigger deficits, or racism against any color, or an unreliable energy transition. That's the majority of people. Put that in your pocket. Know that for fact. Know that when you hear this group of people that are so loud with these megaphones and these media people, they're bought and paid for. But the average person, what I just read, will absolutely look at you eye to eye and say, I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you. So that's the message that we have to keep referring to over and over and over. It's our job. It's all of our jobs. Educate, 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 and then win. People want these basic things. I talked about them: a fair opportunity, a good economy, and a safe communities. And they want people who have real solutions. About time I get to those, isn't it? So we must show them. We must show them that no longer have fairness because the super elite has rigged the system. We need to make sure that they understand the bigger picture that I described today. They need to understand that we must show how voting for super elite-backed candidates are ruining our country and are handing it over to the super elite. And I want to make sure this terminology comes out. Big government, big tech, Wall Street, big pharma, all the people I mentioned. That's the new democracy. That's the new democracy. And they'll leave us with socialized everything. That's what we're seeing, is it not? Think about it. I just want to paint that picture for a minute. You got all these groups that I've mentioned out. They are the true elitists, and they're the ones that, there's not a lot of them, but there's obviously a few thousand, and they truly want control and want power. And so this is why it's so important for us to get this message out to everyone we talk to. So that's why I need you to follow me on Facebook and make sure that you share the messages that I put out, as I put this kind of message out regularly. I need your emails too, because we'll send out that same information so that you can pass it on to your friends and family. It's really important that we do the same thing the Democrats have been so good at, and that's using code words with imaging. So for example, when I say white supremacy, or I say male toxicity, or I say gun violence, everybody's heard those words, and it's almost like, secondhand, is it not? But we need to erase those words, and we need to kind of undo them and really show that when someone says male toxicity, that's a sexist statement. When you say white supremacy, that's a racist statement. And we need to make sure we call that out and do it in a polite manner and repeat it over and over. But we must show how we fix America for them. So how do we do it? First, we must elect people who love America, who love our fellow citizens and love our children and love our grandchildren. And this starts, that love, with protecting women and children. This means not allowing men to compete with women in sports. Can I get an amen? This means that you no longer can drug or mutilate a child, and we make it illegal and punishable by prison. This means restoring our law enforcement and border agents' morale and hiring. The Hoover Protecting the Family Bill creates a PR campaign that does just this. You're very familiar with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, are you not? And you think that commercial, what does it do to you? You're proud, right? You feel good, and you love these young men and women. Well, guess what? Just change the topic a little bit, change the picture, show the law enforcement agents, show the police officers, show them that their mom and dads, their sons and daughters, and they have kids just like you and me. But yet they go out and they risk their lives for us to protect our streets. That's the PR campaign that the Hoover Protecting the Family does. And we will do that. I've met with about 10 different departments across our state, and they all have the same problem. They can't hire law enforcement agents. They just can't, because of morale. Morale's down, and everybody feels like, well, okay, I'm not a hero anymore. I'm not going to get paid real well, and I probably don't have a pension. So we want to make sure that we correct all that. We also call for a national recognition award for anybody, any department that brings down crime by 10%. We'll give them a huge national recognition award. We'll give them a cash bonus, and we'll make it public, and we'll make sure the whole United States sees. Look at Hillsdale County Police Department. They just brought down crime by 10%. We're going to make sure they're recognized. So that continues the pattern of making sure that we hold them in a high light. Next, we must return to a lawful society. What does this mean? I'm gonna back away just real quick. Let's talk about guns for just for a minute. Is that okay?
You got it. All
Okay.
the time in the world.
Okay. Guns. I have guns. You're all probably off guns. But here's the great thing about guns. They're fun. They're there for fun. They're there for sport. They're there for protecting our families. We all know that. So here's some stats you can take home. 90% of homicides are committed with guns that are not owned lawfully. Did you hear that? Not owned lawfully. From 1992 to 2014, we had a 50% increase in guns per capita. Guns per capita, 50% increase. At the same time, violent crime went down by 50%. Go figure that, right? Here's the last part. And that's what kind of got me to digress a little bit. The average criminal, the person that sadly will go to homicide, has been in jail 10 times. There's usually 300 to 500 in every major city that end up really causing the problem. So we must absolutely prosecute repeat criminals and get them off the streets and away from our borders. Third, we must fix the value of our time. We absolutely must restore the value of our dollar and drive down the cost of living. This means restoring the value of the dollar. This means re-energizing America and reliable energy such as natural gas, renewable gas, and advanced reactors. This also means undoing Biden's 517 regulations that drove up the cost of living of $15,000 per family. We do this through the REINS Act, which forces all spending to occur where it's supposed to be. That's Congress. Today, the executive, Biden, or a lot of the bureaucracy can put through laws or put through edicts that can cost us $2 trillion per year. So the REINS Act basically says no longer can you do that. Anything that's more than $100 million must absolutely come before Congress. And that's a bill that you'll see on my website, and that's a bill that we will make sure it gets done. And we need to restore the American value of family. This means no longer penalizing low-income parents when they choose to get married and getting rid of the incentive to displace fathers. I have to talk about this for a minute. We actually lived in Detroit for a year. And one of the saddest things that you'll see is what happened with the war on poverty. What it really was the assault on the family. In 1940 to 1964, the greatest transformation out of poverty in the history of the world took place in America. 85% of the black community took themselves, by themselves, out of poverty. I got to say that to 500 people downtown Detroit. Amen. I'm talking to them and they're listening. So when you took and you displaced, you took away the dad, you say, hey dad, and all you guys in here that are dads and fathers and grandfathers, you can't be a dad anymore. You can't be in the home and you can't be a husband. You can't take care of your family. What would you do? How would you feel? It's hard to imagine being a father finding out when I was 17, 18 years old, trying to tell me that I can't take care of my children, I can't take care of my wife. Well, you probably turn to crime. You probably turn to gangs. You probably turn to alcohol, and you probably go to drugs, and you probably end up in prison. And that's exactly what the Democrats did to that community, because that community was coming conservative. They still have a lot of conservative values. They have a lot of Christian values. They're not about this new transgender thing at all. They're quite against it. So we need to undo that policy. No longer will we penalize low-income mom and dads, and no longer can we incentivize moms having children without their dads. Amen. Thank you. Everybody get on? Is that good with you guys? Okay. It's to me, I just, as a dad, it hits really hard at home. And I've seen a lot of them. I guess maybe that's why. I took in a young man, teenager, and he had that same problem. He didn't have a dad at home, and he just needed a dad at home. And I kicked his butt a little bit, and then he turned into a heck of a man. He still is today. Number 5, we must return to excellence in the classroom. We must provide better options for our children, and it's time to remember what schools are for. It's for these 3 things. Number 1, it's for the student. Number 2, it's for the student. And number 3, it's for the student. It's about the children. It's all about the children. Yeah, what did we see in the last 20 years? We saw a 90% increase in the administrative state. Can you imagine? It's not certainly about the student. So we need to remove the Department of Education. We need to remove the Board of Education here in Michigan. We need to streamline the organization so it provides accountability. We remove the bureaucracy that increased that 90%. Learning has gone down instead of up with all these administrators. We need to get rid of the cultural distractions, replace them with classical liberal arts education. Nowhere better place than right here in Hillsdale and Northwood. To teach kids how to think critically. We help this by passing the ECCU, the Educational Children's Choice Act. Let me tell you about the ECCU. What that does basically is allows us as private taxpayers or business owners to take a tax credit when we owe tax. And that tax credit goes to an independent scholarship fund, not government. Amen. And then that children from around our state, as well as around our country, can apply for that scholarship, and then they can go to a safe, better school for them. And that's what we need to do so we can break up this monotonous thing that we call education here in our state. We must decouple from China and bring back our jobs to America. By driving down the cost of regulations, re-energizing America, and using reliable low-cost energy and passing the Buy America for America Act. That's the Hoover Buy America for America Act. And what that does is it provides a massive incentive to manufacture and sell American-made products. What we've learned is talking to people around the state, not just me, but people independent from me, has said, look, we asked this question. If product X is this much more, maybe 20% more, than product Y, and product X is made in the United States of America, which one are you going to buy? Every day, I'm buying American. I buy an American. Matter of fact, it's the young people, it's the millennials. Millennials have caught on to this. They know that a lot of this labor from China is slave labor. So they're onto it, they want to buy. So the other thing the Hoover Buy America for America Act is make sure that labeling online and in store is very clear to see. Think about it. When you're online and you go to buy something, is it really easy to find where it's made? It's not. It's even, unless it's made in the United States, it's really hard to see there's a big old flag. So we want to make sure it's a law that when you go on, there's a big, huge, beautiful American made in USA flag, or it's a CCP flag. And then when people go to push that button, you know they're going to think twice about that. At least they'll be making an informed decision. So we want to make sure that that happens. One thing I also wanted to mention about family is that we have a breakdown in the family besides low income. It's also now across all ages and and particularly 18 to 38-year-olds. So I'll give you a quick stat. 18 to 30, 26% of them are married, yet almost 50% of them have children. When you go up in age, it gets worse. 85 on 38-year-olds, 85% of them have children, yet only 56% of them are married. All generations agree that the best place to raise a child is in a home with mom and dad. So we also know that they'll respond to tax incentives. So if we give them a nice big tax credit for them to get married, and then we increase the tax credit each additional year, they stay married. We need the families to stick together. A lot of people always ask me, Hoover, are you going to make that retro? I mean, I wouldn't mind it. I've been, my wife and I have been together almost 40 years, so I would want to go to bat for that, but I don't think it's a good idea. Lastly, we need some guardrails in our political leaders too. So let's start with me. I signed up for the pledge. What that means is the pledge is that I'll only serve for 2 terms as your next senator. I think that should go across the board. Lobbying is mostly uncapped and mostly unreported. One thing I'll say about lobbying is that the Heritage Foundation lobbies, Freedom Works lobbies, Social Conservative Conference lobbies. Those are good people. They're on our team. They're Christians, all of them. Actually, every single organization I just talked about, those are Christian-based organizations. They may be millionaires and billionaires, but they still love this country just as much as you and I do, and they're the ones that can help us get us across the finish line. I just gotta win my primary, and that's where you all come in. So lobbying. So we still need to cap it. We still need to cap it, and we need to ensure that there's full reporting. So when a politician or elected official is meeting, that needs to make sure that it's put out there on the website. Insider trading. No longer can we have the Hunter Bidens of the world using and abusing the public for self-gain. If you're elected, your family is banned from receiving funds from the DC. Sadly, we have people here in Michigan too that are doing the exact same thing currently in Congress, and some that may actually run against me. Measurements. Think about it. You and I, if we do a job, if we're working, we have goals and we have responsibilities. Even as a business owner, if we don't satisfy our customers, if we're not getting 5-star reviews, we're getting measured one way or another. Government doesn't have measurements. What their measurement is that how many people participated in it. It's not that the idea actually improved anything. So I say that every bill must now include measurements. It must have goals and measurements, and then we must be able to go back and say, okay, how well is this bill doing? And it must be built in so Congress is forced to measure it. And if it's not doing good, kick it out. How many bills do you? And then the last thing is the length of the bills. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which includes Michigan as an endowment, was accomplished in less than 4,500 words, compared to the Affordable Care Act, which is 363,086 words. No one could ever read and no one could ever comprehend. Certainly not me and most average Americans. So we need to correct that. So no longer can they put together these massive bills that the average public can't go in and read. Actually, not one congressman or senator could read that bill, not one of them. So this is the kind of nonsense that we have to get rid of. That's right. Lastly, and I love this one, we should pass a bill that you must cut spending. In Congress, if you don't cut spending, you forfeit your right to run for re-election. I'm not an insider. I'm not a super elite candidate. I think you can tell I'm from a small town, and I need your help. I need volunteers for signatures. I need small donations. That's the most important thing, It's like I know I have to fundraise, and talked about these $50 million. But really, for me, the best thing in the world would be to get $5 or $10 out of the 2 million people that are going to vote for me. That would make all the difference, and I think that's really how we should try to run this.
How many signatures do you need?
We need 15,000 signatures, minimum 30,000 maximum is what we're allowed to turn in. We've got a couple of people here that I grew up with, thank you so much, but they are helping us collect these signatures. We got a small team, but we need a small army. I need you to follow us on social media. That's Hoover for Senate, F-O-R, Hoover for Senate. And I need you to share the message. And the last thing, I just need you to join the fight. And I know that you hear that a lot, but truly, let's join the fight together. And let's fight them till hell freezes over, and then let's fight them on the ice. Thank you so much. Any questions?
I'd like to make some comments or questions. You're running for U.S. Senate.
That's correct.
And you do have a lot of really good points. I commend you on many of them, but there's 3 that I kind of caught I'd like to go over with you. You mentioned schools.
Yeah.
Would you agree, and I think I heard what you said, that the feds shouldn't be in schools?
That's right, I said to eliminate the Department of Education.
All right. So you got your 33% there.
Okay, good.
Number 2, guns. You mentioned most gun crimes are committed by illegal guns.
They're committed by guns that are not owned legally, that's correct.
So if they're stolen, I would agree with you, they're illegal.
Absolutely.
Okay. Otherwise, a person has a right to keep and bear arms. Do you agree with that?
Of course I do.
And the third, you mentioned the new democracy.
Yeah.
and I would, if I'm understanding you right, that's what they're pushing.
That's
But
right.
we never ever were a democracy.
Yeah,
Except
so-
that if we
Well, right,
walk like a duck
you're-
and
you're
act
right,
like a
we're
duck.
a republic.
We're a
But
republic.
that's exactly right. The new democracy, the way that I constructed this in my own mind after I've been studying this for too many years, is that looking at what they're trying to organize, and they've done an amazing job. You know, they've got big tech and Federal Reserve and Wall Street and Hollywood and big media, and they're all part of the same conundrum, and they're the ones where the money is flowing down to get candidates elected. And that's not of the people, by the people, or for the people. That's of the elite, for the elite, by the elite. And that's a democracy. That's not a republic. And that's what's so critical for us, to make sure we communicate over and over and over to all of our family, all of our friends, and everybody across our state.
Thank you.
99%. All right. Question?
Yeah, back when I was a kid, late seventies, early eighties, I remember something about the Supreme Court ruling where companies, corporations can make unlimited contributions to politicians. There was a cap before that, but I don't remember the later years. But I was thinking to myself, that's a big mistake, because all the companies will have a monopoly on the politicians now, and they really want to. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, no, actually, I just listened to a political consultant talk in great detail about the system that we currently have today. And there's different ways around the system. They did change a little bit of how you can do campaign finance, and they buttoned some of that down, but there's still a lot of wiggle room to get around where, that's why you have guys like George Soros. So how it happens, it goes into PACs. That's just it. It goes into PACs. So some people would say, you know, we got to bury this down and get rid of that. And I typically would agree with that. But listening to the political consultant on the way down here today, he made a lot of good points. He said, try controlling the flow of money. They'll find a way. They'll get it around the system. So his commentary was, open it up for everyone so that we can get more money coming into conservative candidates like you. Because right now the system is sort of working against more conservative candidates. Certainly against people that are not part of the inner circle. But when you look at Freedom Works, Club for Growth, the Heritage Foundation, you know, those folks, they're limited to a certain extent. And that we don't want to limit them. So he makes a decent point. I mean, he kind of made me think a little bit outside the box. I'll share it with you. Actually, it's a recorded podcast, and I wasn't part of the podcast, but he goes into great detail and explains it. If you really want to listen to Kim, and a guy that's on our side, clearly on our team. He was J.D. Vance's political consultant and helped him win his campaign.
Just on the issue of PACs a little bit, and a lot of people here may not know, but for a very, very long time, Hillsdale County Republican Party was not a PAC. They didn't want to do the paperwork, they didn't want to put money into candidates, they didn't want to do anything but meet at Olivia's, have cocktails and steak. When we took over, we created a PAC. We created a PAC for a very big reason, and that's so that we can start to push conservative candidates. So we can start putting that money behind them instead of at Olivia's for cocktails and steak.
John's taking my talk time to my notes.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Any other questions?
Are you reserved like that?
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
a comment.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And if everybody here doesn't understand the fight that we're in, this is right down to your back door, your back pocket. Okay, as a commissioner, I attended the Michigan Association of Counties, Michigan Works, okay? This is where businesses go to get help, financial help, okay? The last meeting we had 2 people from the Detroit area, females, and it was down to the conversation of who's gonna get money as a business for an apprenticeship program, okay? These 2 individuals from the Detroit area were insistent upon the fact that only businesses that were diversity and inclusion cooperative would get the money.
Mhm.
So now they're sorting out businesses that aren't diversity and inclusive, okay? So if you don't go along with their format, you don't get money for an apprenticeship program. So they channeled every direction of our lives, virtually, monetarily, to affect everybody, so they can control. Because there's lots of businesses out there that don't agree with this left movement, and they're not diversity and inclusion,
That's part of that ESG.
and they're not gonna get money.
That's part of that ESG score. That's what happened with Bud Light and Target.
In Disney. You know, in one of the comments I made about the electorate, the average voter is completely against racism. And in all directions, and so they won't stand for it. We just have to make sure that's a great example. That's an example that I need to use and will use to communicate out that says that's racism. It's just not right.
Yep.
Well, even the whole thing is against itself, if you think about what it is. If you don't agree with their system, then you can't be included in their system.
Yeah, that's right. That's
It's
racism.
the biggest
What's
hypocrisy
the I stand
there
for?
possibly is.
What's the I stand for?
Yeah.
I would hope that when it comes to democracies, all you hear is democracy, democracy, even from Republicans.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is like Germany.
Yes.
Germany in 1933, they voted Hitler in. All democracies destroy themselves and become socialists. And that's what they're trying to do, make us think we're a democracy.
That's right.
We're a compound republic.
Yeah.
The top of the pyramid is the township. Then we the people,
Yeah.
the township, then the county, then the state, then the federal government's on the bottom.
That's right.
That's what their founding fathers gave us, is that. And Shirky tried to get rid of this. And so he wants to be a democracy, get rid of the electoral college, get rid of it and go direct. That was our senator, Shirky.
I know, and sad. I'm so sad to hear that. But when people talk about democracy, this is the example I use. And I'm one of our founding fathers. I can't remember which one it is, but it's great. So we're a democracy, and there's 3 of us, and there's 2 wolves, and there's a sheep.
Frankly.
And now, thank you. Now we're going to vote. We're going to do the democracy vote. See who's for dinner. What's for dinner?
He's always the